Here's the thing, there are numerous characters in the story of the Mahabharata, some major, some minor. And sometimes it can get a little tricky to keep track of all of them and keep all the info straight in our heads. So, before we get into the core story of the Mahabharata, let's look into some of these characters so that when the story progresses, we know exactly where and how these characters fit in the story. To that end, today we look into some of the characters from the Mahabharata. Today's main character is a fascinating one. He is ambitious, resourceful, ingenious. He's also constantly trying to improve his life. He's learning new skills. He's trying to be the best in his field. He's making all the right connections. He's successful. He's also unforgiving and knows how to hold a grudge. And so when the person who he believed was his friend humiliates him, he is unforgiving and unyielding. This is the story of Drona, his early life, his revenge against his childhood friend King Drupada, and his role as the preceptor or teacher of the Kuru princes, the Kauravas and Pandavas. Along the way, we'll also learn about a couple of other characters who also happen to be connected to Drona, like the Kuru's teacher Sharadvat and Kripa, and also Drona's son Ashwatthama. Namaste, so glad you're here. I'm your host Nivi, and this is Stories of India Retold podcast, your source for well-researched, entertaining stories from the critical edition of the Mahabharata. You can listen to these stories wherever you listen to your podcasts. The video podcasts are available on YouTube Podcast and Spotify, and you'll find smaller clips on the YouTube channel. Do not forget to subscribe so that you will not miss any of the episodes. Also, you will find all the links in the episode description, where you will also find the resources used for today's episode. So let's start with today's story. Drona had an interesting background. His father was a Maharishi named Bharadvaja. Rishi means sage. Maharishi means a great sage, someone who is wise, well respected, knowledgeable, and an expert in his field of study. One day, while preparing for his daily rituals, Bharadvaja's paths crossed with that of a beautiful Apsara named Gritachi. Bharadvaja and Gritachi have a baby together. It is said that the baby was born from the seed of Bharadvaja, which was deposited in a vessel or pot. And because the baby was born from this pot, he was named Drona, which means vessel or pot, and that is how Drona got his name. Drona had a humble but not exactly ordinary background. He was very privileged because he had access to an education. He studied and excelled at all the Vedas and Vedangas, including Dhanurveda, the art of warfare and weapons, particularly archery. Drona's father, who was a teacher, was also a very well-connected person, and these connections would be influential in how Drona's future panned out. One of these connections was Bharadvaja's student by the name Agnivesha. Agnivesha studied the art of the use of a weapon named Agneya, which was a fire weapon. And he learned it initially from Bharadvaja, but later on he went on to become an expert in the use of this powerful weapon. Drona studied under Agnivesha, and under his training, he learned the art of the use of Agneya. The second connection is actually quite highly placed. Bharadvaja was friends with the king of Panchala, Prishata. Prishata would visit the wise Bharadvaja at his school pretty often, and each time he would bring his son Drupada with him. Prince Drupada and Droṇa were of a similar age, so they spent a lot of time together. They played together, had a good time together. They had a lot of love and affection for each other, and they were best of friends in their childhood. But as time passed, these meetings became less and less, as it often happens in life, and the friends drift apart. They get busy with their own lives, and few years pass, and Bharadvaja passes away. It was his wish that his son Drona should be married, and so Drona decides to get married. And he marries well, no surprise there given his background and education. He married a woman named Kripi, who was the granddaughter of the illustrious Maharishi Gautama. And Maharishi Gautama is a big deal. Kripi was the daughter of Gautama's son Sharadvat. This was a highly advantageous match for Drona because 1. His father in law Sharadvat was a renowned expert in Dhanurveda. 2. Kripi and her twin brother Kripa were adopted and raised by the Kuru king Shantanu. There is a story about why and how Shantanu came to raise Sharadvat's twin babies. Sharadvat met a beautiful woman named Janapati, and they have the twin babies together. But even before the birth of the twins, Sharadvat decides to leave to pursue his education in Dhanurveda. The story goes that the babies were born from Sharadvat's seeds, which were deposited on reeds in the forest. And that is how these babies were found abandoned in the forest. King Shantanu, Bhishma's father, was hunting in that forest around that time. One of his soldiers happened to find these babies and he brings these babies to Shantanu. Shantanu is surprised to find that the babies were wrapped in black deer skin along with a few bow and arrows. This was a clear indication that the babies belonged to someone who was an expert in the art of weapons. Shantanu felt bad for the babies. He didn't want to abandon them, which is why he decides to take them with him and raise them under his protection. The baby boy was named Kripa, which means compassion, so named because the babies were adopted out of compassion by Shantanu. His twin sister was named Kripi. Later on, Sharadvat did finally come looking for his children. After they were united, Sharadvat trains his son Kripa in the art of Dhanurveda. Sharadvat becomes a famous teacher and he goes on to teach many kids belonging to the royal family, including the Kauravas and Pandavas. And so, as you can see, Drona's marriage to Sharadvat's daughter is a very advantageous match, and this is the beginning of his connection to the illustrious Kuru family. Drona and Kripi have a son who was named Ashwatthama. Ashwatthama, like his father and grandfather, becomes an expert in Dhanurveda. He was given the title of Maharati, which is a title given to warriors of a certain caliber. He was an elite warrior. Ashwatthama would become very good friends with Duryodhana and he would fight the Kurukshetra war with the Kauravas. As for Drona, he's slowly building up his profile. He continues to learn and train in the use of various weaponry. He hits the jackpot when he receives weapons from the powerful Parashurama. For those of you who are not familiar with him, Parashurama is a fearsome warrior and sage. He's the son of a sage and he's said to be the sixth of Vishnu's 10 avatars. Word reaches Drona that the great Parashurama was getting ready to retire and was in the process of giving away all of his possessions. Drona goes to Parashurama, introduces himself, and asks for some of his possessions. Parashurama regretfully tells him that he had already given away all of his wealth. All he was left with was himself and an array of weapons. Some of them were rare and invaluable. Drona grabs the opportunity. He asks Parashurama not just for the weapons but also for training in the use of them. And that is how Drona, trained by the great Parashurama himself and in possession of some amazing weapons, cements his position. He was in an extremely privileged position. He was actually very pleased with himself. It was quite an accomplishment. It was around this time when Drona heard of King Prashada's passing and the fact that Drupada had inherited the kingdom of Panchala. Drona decides to pay Drupada a visit. Drona is very excited and he goes to Drupada and tells him all about the knowledge and wealth he had learned. Unfortunately for Drona, Drupada was not on the same page about their personal relationship. Drupada mocks Drona for imagining the kind of relationship they have with each other. Drupada claimed that a friendly relationship between them when they were young students was because it was under different circumstances and it was convenient for him at that time. But now they were older. The circumstances in life had changed. The differences between them were vast, unsurmountable even, both socially and financially. There was no reason for them to be friends anymore. Go find new friends. Drupada scoffs at Drona. Drona is humiliated. He stews in his anger at being so callously and utterly humiliated by Drupada. Eventually, he is consumed by this need to exact revenge against Drupada. He spends a lot of time planning his revenge, and this revenge of his would put in motion events that would change things not just for Drupada, but also for the Kuru princes. But how could a poor Brahmana, albeit an extremely skilled one, defeat a mighty king? Drona knew that he needed power and he needed kshatriyas or warriors who would follow him, who would fight for him and for his cause without question. Basically, he needed a well-trained army. And how does he acquire that? Not by hiring mercenaries, because he does not have that kind of money. Drona has his sights set on something much more bigger, much more grander. He decides that the Kuru princes, the Kauravas and Pandavas, would fight for him and help him exact revenge from Drupada. Sounds like a ridiculous plan, doesn't it? How would a teacher wield that kind of power over the princes belonging to one of the most powerful dynasties? That is where the unique teacher-pupil relationship in ancient India comes into picture. And we will look into that in more detail. One day, Drona meets the Kuru princes just outside of Hastinapura. Both Kauravas and Pandavas were there playing with each other. They were playing with a wooden ball. And this ball, which was probably more like a wooden disc than a ball we know of, it falls into a well. Drona watches as the Kuru princes unsuccessfully try to retrieve the ball. Drona approaches them. He reproves their inability to problem solve and retrieve the ball. He feels that any worthy prince of a lineage, especially a lineage as great as the Kurus, should possess critical and analytical skills which would help them accomplish a simple task as the one in front of them. Watch me as I use my knowledge and skills to retrieve the ball, Drona says. Drona shoots the ball with an arrow. Then he takes another arrow and shoots it to the first one so as to fuse the tips together. The princes watch in awe as he repeats the process to make a chain of arrows long enough for him to reach. Then he grabs the arrow closest to him and pulls the ball out of the well. Drona was brilliant, and the Kuru princes were thoroughly impressed. They wanted to know who he was. Drona doesn't share that information directly, but he tells them to describe him and the day's events to Bhishma. He will know who I am, he says. The princes didn't know it yet, but Drona had just set the ball rolling for his grand revenge. And Drona was right. When Bhishma heard from his grandnephews about what happened, he immediately figures out who the skilled Brahmana was. And as fate would have it, Bhishma was on the hunt for a suitable teacher for the Kuru princes, and Drona ticked all of the boxes. Soon an interview followed. Like any good employer, Bhishma asks Drona how he came to be in Hastinapura, because he knew that Drona's meeting with the Kuru princes was not a coincidence. Drona, for his part, does not lie. He tells Bhishma about his fallout with Drupada, his plans for revenge, and his wish to train warriors who would fight for him. After listening to the explanation, Bhishma decides to give Drona the job. Are you also surprised by Bhishma's decision? He knows exactly what Drona's intentions were, and yet he gives Drona the job. Let me know what you think about this in the comments. I'm curious to know. Anyways, Drona wastes no time. As soon as he meets his new students, he tells them that at the end of their training period, when they've become skilled warriors, he has a task for them. Can I count on you for support? He asks. No one volunteers to do the task for him except his most dedicated student, Arjuna. And this here is the start of one of the most important and complex relationships in the epic, the relationship between the teacher Drona and his student Arjuna. Under Drona's tutelage, the princes, especially Arjuna, become skilled warriors. Arjuna was his star student, no doubt about it. And what he achieved with Arjuna definitely is one of the main reasons for Drona's success and popularity. Drona's fame as an accomplished teacher spread far and wide. Royal and Kshatriya families from everywhere wanted their sons to be trained under Drona. Years pass. Drona continues to work tirelessly with the princes to train them as elite warriors. When Drona was satisfied that the students were suitably trained, he demands Guru Dakshina, or tribute. This is how Guru Dakshina works. It is a tradition of paying one's teacher after the completion of their education. It is kind of a traditional graduation gift paid by the student to the teacher, and it is not strictly monetary. It can be anything that the teacher asks. Now, Drona dedicated many years in training his students. He was teaching them critical life-saving skills, and his role as their teacher was revered in those days. His students had no option but to do as he asked. And what did Drona ask? He demanded that the princes take an army and capture the kingdom of Panchala and their king Drupada. The princes had to do it. They owed it to him. So they all marched to Drupada's capital and hand him a humiliating defeat, after which they bring Drupada to Drona. And that was it. That was what Drona was waiting for a long time. He had planned it, worked towards it, obsessed over it. And so he takes great pleasure in twisting the knife he had plunged to Drupada's precious pride. Years ago, you told me that a king could not be friends with someone who was not a king. Now I have defeated you. You are at my mercy. But since you were my dear friend, I shall not kill you. Instead, I shall take half your kingdom. And since I am a king now, and you're equal, we can renew our friendship, can't we? Drona asks, handing Drupada the humiliation he had planned for years. Drupada concedes defeat. Internally, he fumed at the insult and the dramatic reduction in power. But in the face of the power and influence Drona had built for himself, Drupada was helpless. And so Drona ruled the northern part of Panchala and set base in Ahichatra, which is in present day Bareilly district in the state of Uttar Pradesh in northern India. And Drupada was left with the southern part of Panchala with Kampilya as his capital. Kampilya is in present day Farrukhabad district in Uttar Pradesh. And their kingdoms were separated by the river Ganga. And that is how Drupada's humiliation, as envisioned by Drona, was complete. Drona got his glorious revenge and even got an entire kingdom out of it. What a resourceful man he was. Both Drona and Drupada played important roles in the story of the Mahabharata. It is interesting to know that in a dramatic turn of events later in the story, Drupada's family actually becomes closely associated with that of the Pandavas because they married his daughter Draupadi, while Drona and his family side with the Kauravas. And we get to see these drama-filled stories in future episodes. As for this episode, that is all I have for you. I hope you liked this story, and if you did, please don't forget to subscribe. I hope to see you here soon. Thank you. Dhanyavada.